Hey guys, um, hope you guys are doing well here. First of all, let me apologize about that square there around my face. Unfortunately, I can't do anything about that because I'm sharing my screen with you. So this is not a regular recording. You're actually seeing my desktop screen, so I can't turn that off for whatever reason. But I hope you guys are doing well. I know that it's kind of a bummer the way things are playing out here, that we're not able to be at school. And, there's a lot of stuff going on with different families and stuff. So I was talking to Pastor and we were throwing around some ideas of what we could do as far as this class goes. I feel like it's important that we continue to move forward, or else we're just not going to cover the kind of information we need before we get into Algebra 2. So I am going to take some time over the next couple of weeks and teach you some new lessons, and we're going to hopefully be able to do this all online by video like this. So we're going to start out today in chapter number 9. Okay, we're on page number 308. I'd like you to treat this just like we were in class. So you would open up your notebook and put your title for today's lesson 9.1, solving by factoring. We're getting into quadratic equations. So this whole chapter number 9 is dealing with quadratic equations. So in your notes, if you could make a big title head that specifically says quadratic equations, and then your lesson 9.1, solving by factoring. Okay, so we're going to cover different methods of how to deal with quadratic equations. And we're going to get into lesson 9.1 today. We'll be able to do some of this on my whiteboard, so you'll be able to see what's going on, and we'll work some of these out just like if we were in class. Okay, so open up your book, page 308. I would like you to take notes just as if we were in the classroom. So anything I put on the screen will also go into your notes. If you have questions as you go along this, write them down, and then when you're done, go ahead and shoot me a text or give me a call, and we'll work through them together and hopefully answer all those questions for you. Okay, so page 308, we're dealing with, again, quadratic equations. And we are going to start here at the top. Quadratic equations are second degree polynomial equations. So write that in your notes. Quadratic equations are second degree polynomial equations. So what are second degree polynomial equations? Well, we know that our degrees are based on the exponents. So for in our second degree, the highest exponent is 2. Okay, so quadratic equations are equations that have terms with the highest degree of 2. Okay, so not most of our equations up to this point have just been x, and then your regular number or whatever, but we're talking about quadratic equations here with second degrees. Okay, so in other words, we're going to have more than one x in this equation. Okay, so recall that in the second degree polynomial, the highest power on a variable is 2. Okay, the standard form of a quadratic equation is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. I want you to write that down. Standard form. We should be somewhat familiar with standard form by this point, but go ahead and put this into your notes, okay, because as we're dealing with quadratic equations, in standard form, this is how they'll appear. You'll have your highest variable first, okay? So your x squared will go first, okay? And whatever number is with that x squared, okay? Your numerical coefficient always goes with your variable there. So if you move your x squared, you also have to move the coefficient that's with it, okay? So it's ax squared goes first, plus or minus bx, okay? Your a and b are numbers. I hope you understand that. But your highest term x, or your highest variable, goes first. That's your x squared. Then you have your x, and then you have just your numerical coefficient, and that will equal 0. Okay, so it's important we understand that we have to put our equation into this order before we do anything. All right, so standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Okay, in this setup, a, b, and c are real numbers, meaning they're actual numbers. Okay, and a is going to be greater than 0. Okay, if a is equal to 0, the equation is linear, not quadratic. So we've dealt with linear equations up to this point where there's only been one x. Now we're dealing with quadratics here where there's more than one x. But in order for it to be a quadratic equation, our a has to be greater than 0. If it is equal to 0, then it is not a quadratic, it is a linear, okay? In other words, if I have the equation, let me just jump something out here. We've got ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. If this is 0x squared plus 2x plus 3, okay? This is not a linear, this is not a quadratic equation. This is actually a linear equation because our x has a coefficient of 0, okay? In order for it to be a quadratic equation, a has to be greater than 0, okay, in order for it to be quadratic, all right? This is for quadratic equations. So keep that in mind as we're going through here, okay? So we're talking about quadratic equations. The a must be greater than 0 in order for it to be a quadratic. In Chapter 7, the zero factor property was used to solve polynomial equations. Remember, Pastor Todd taught you guys that particular lesson. This is going to come back around and we're going to use this in these quadratic equations as well, okay? So hopefully we remember how to do those. If not, we'll review them real quick as we go into working these problems out. This chapter is going to apply, chapter number 7 will apply to this property, specifically to quadratic equations. After writing the equation in standard form, factor the polynomial, and then set each factor equal to 0 and solve for the variable. So let me give you some steps here of how we're going to do this. Let me make sure I'm not getting ahead of myself. But so here's your steps. Okay, this is steps for solving by factoring. Okay. Trust me, I write just as bad on this whiteboard as I do on the one at school, so bear with me, okay? So step number 1, we have to make sure that our equation is written in standard form. So step number 1 is write the equation in standard form. If you want, you can put that standard form in your notes. Ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, okay? So it must be first written in this form. Our equation must equal 0 before we can move on, okay? So step number 1, write our equation in standard form. Step number 2, okay, after writing in standard form, we're going to factor, okay? So factor the polynomial, okay? Factor your polynomial. EJ, don't worry, you can pause and write your notes out as we go step by step so you don't fall behind. That's the benefit of having pre-recorded lessons. You can hit the pause button. So step number 2 is factor the quadratic equations, okay? Now, after you factor, you're going to set each factor to equal 0. And then step number 4 is you're going to solve. Okay? Now what I mean by set each factor to equal 0, let's say I've got x plus 2 and x plus 3. Okay? I've factored my polynomial and I get this. Okay? We're going to set each one of these to equal 0. So x plus 2 equals 0, and then x plus 3 equals 0. And I'm going to solve both of these, okay, for step number 4. All right, so I would isolate my x, move my 2 over, isolate my x, and solve for x for both of those. Okay, and then of course, as in most of our math that we do, step number 5 is going to be check. Okay. And we'll talk about how to do that in just a minute. All right, so those are our steps for solving by factoring. So let's take a look at some of these. We'll work some of these out on the board step by step so we can see just exactly how they're done. Okay, so look in your book. We're at example 9.1a. Okay, example 9.1a. Okay, and let's take a look at this. I have the equation 2x squared plus x equals 15. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is what? Well, I need to put this in standard form. What is standard form? Well, my equation has to equal 0, which means I have to move this 15 over to this side and have my equation equal 0. So my first step is to rewrite this as 2x squared plus x. And remember, when we move our 15 over it, the sign changes. Minus 15 equals 0. So now I'm in standard form. I've got my x squared here. I've got my x and my my whole number, and then my equation equals 0. So once I get this in standard form, what is my next step? Okay, my next step is to factor. Okay, so I'm going to take this whole polynomial and I'm going to factor. Well, how do we factor? Remember, we take our number here and we break up our number into two factors. Okay, so we write down all my factors for 15. So if I have negative 15, my factors are 15 and a negative 1. I've got negative 15 and a positive 1, and then I've got 3 and a negative 5, and I've got a negative 3 and a positive 5. Okay. Now remember, we also have a numerical coefficient with our x squared. Okay, so take that into consideration when you're factoring these. Now, for sake of time, obviously we can see in our example we've got 2x. Excuse me, I just hit the wrong thing here. We've got 2x minus 5 and x plus 3. So this is how this factors down to this here. Okay, so we factor this into 2x minus 3. Now remember, guys, this step takes a long time sometimes. Okay, you just keep playing with it and keep playing with it and keep moving your numbers around, keep moving your signs and figure it out until you get something that works out. Don't get lazy and give up on it. Okay, there's no reason to give up on math. We can figure it out in some form or fashion. Okay, so we have then our factors here. Our next step is then to take our factors and break them down so they both equal 0. So I've got 2x minus 5 equals 0, and then I've got x plus 3 equals 0. Okay, so we break those down so that we each one equals 0, and then I'm solving for x. So I've got 2x plus 5. I divide by 2, so x equals 5 over 2. Okay, so this is my first one. X equals 5 over 2. This one's a little easier. X equals negative 3. So now I've got these two answers here. 5 over 2 and a negative 3, excuse me, over, just a negative 3. Okay, so this is my answer here. X equals 5 over 2 and x equals negative 3. All right, now, once we get to this step, what we're going to do is we're going to check. So we're going to take both of these and we're going to plug them in individually and work them through with x being 5 over 2 first, and then we're going to plug it in as x being negative 3. So let's try this here, okay? Okay, so my equation was 2x squared plus x equals 15. All right, I'm going back to my original equation, how it was written, and that's where I plug in my x's. Now my x's were 5 over 2 and then 3. Okay, so we're going to try both of these. First one we're going to do is 5 over 2. So we've got 2 times 5 over 2 squared. Okay, don't forget that square there. It's very easy to overlook that, and then it kind of messes everything up. Okay, plus 5 over 2 equals 15. All right, now, so I go back to here. How do I square this? Well, squaring a fraction is just like squaring the numerator and squaring the denominator. So I've got 2 5 times 5, or 5 squared, is 25. 2 squared is 4, okay, plus 5 over 2 equals 15. Okay, now from here I can cancel out. Okay, so 2 goes into 4. Remember, this is just like I had it written over 1, right? We put a whole number over 1, and then we can just cancel out. So we've got 2 goes into 4 2 times. Okay, so now after canceling out like that, I have 25 over 2 plus 5 over 2 equals 15. Okay, so this is where I'm at up to this point. Okay, pretty simple. And we are well on our way here. Okay, so we've canceled out in this step. So now I get this new fraction of 25 over 2. 2 went into our 4 2 times. That's where we get our denominator. Now, remember, when we're adding fractions together, in order to add them, they must have the same denominators, okay? In this case, they have the same denominators because we canceled out up here. So because they have the same denominators, I can just go ahead and add my numerators together. So 25 plus 5 is 30. So now I've got 30 over 2. Remember, we don't add our denominators when we're adding and subtracting fractions. Our denominator just stays as 2. Okay, and then 2 goes into 30 15 times. So I have 15 equals 15. So I know that this one is correct. Okay, now let's go and try the next one here. Erase this. Hopefully you got that. If not, you can rewind it. And all right, so I take my original equation and I plug in 3 now for 3 now for my x's. So I've got 2 times 3 squared plus 3 equals 15. Okay, 3 squared is what? Well, 3 squared is 9. So now I've got 2 times 9 plus 3 equals 15. 2 times 9 is 18 plus 3 is 15. Oh, you know what I did? This is not positive. This is negative. Right? Yeah. Oh, see, you guys didn't catch me on that. What's wrong with you guys? So our answer is a negative 3. I apologize about that. So let's change this to a negative. See, that's why we check, so we can make sure that we have what we're doing. So this, you can write this, I know this confuses EJ sometimes, I can write this as 2x squared plus negative 3 equals 15, or excuse me, 2x negative 3 times negative 3 squared plus. So this negative 3, I wrote it like this because technically if I have a plus sign in front of it, this is my sign separating my numbers. So that's why I wrote it like this. 2 times negative 3 squared minus 3 equals 15. All right. So you can just change that that plus sign to a minus because our x is a negative 3. It's not a positive. And I apologize about that. I missed that before. Hopefully you guys caught that and you're like, what in the world is she talking about? Anyway, okay, so we've got 18 minus 3, so now I've got 15 equals 15. So now I know that negative 3 works. And again, this is why we check. Okay, I checked and then I realized that negative, or I was missing my negative there. Okay, so those are the steps basically as we walk through those. Let's try another equation here. And we're going to do 9.1 B. Okay, so if you're on page 309, you can see this here. We've got our equation x squared plus 5x equals negative 4. Okay, now negative 4, our equation is equaling negative 4, so we have to put this in standard form. Well, what's standard form? My equation has to equal 0. Okay, so I move this around, so I have x squared plus 5x plus 4 equals 0. Now, is this in standard form? Well, I've got my x squared first. I've got my x next, I've got my whole number, and my equation equals 0. So this is in standard form, okay? So first step is always to put in standard form. Second step is to factor. Okay, so I take my my factors of 4, okay, and I've got several different, or I've got a couple different options there, okay, and I try my different options for 4, and I come out with, I'm going to come out with factors of x plus 4 and x plus 1. Okay, so those are my factors there. Now I'm going to take each one of these and apply the 0 property. Okay, so I'm going to make each of these equal 0. So x plus 4 equals 0 and x plus 1 equals 0. And then I solve for x in both. X equals -4 and x equals -1. Okay, so these then would be my answers. Okay, and I'd have to put them both. All right, don't just put one, put them both. All right, now I've got my answers. My next step then is to check. Okay, so I'm going to start off with my original equation, which was x squared plus 5x equals -4. Okay, I had my answers of -4 and a -1. Okay, and I'm going to try both of these. So we've got, starting with the -4, we've got -4 squared plus 5 times -4 equals -4. Okay, again, don't forget that square there. Okay, -4 squared is 16, a positive 16, because when you multiply negative by negative, it turns positive. So we've got a positive 16. 5 times 4, or 5 times a -4 is a -20. And then we have a -4. Okay, so if I've got 20 negatives and I put 16 negatives in, I have 16 positives in, I have 4 negatives left over. So my equation equals, meaning this is correct. Okay, so that was for -4. Now let's try for -1. Okay, let me erase this. Take the same equation and we plug in -1. So I have -1 squared plus 5 times a -1 equals a -4. Okay, -1 squared is a positive 1. -5 equals a -4. I have 1 positive, 5 negatives, so I have 4 negatives. Okay, so then this one also checks out, and that is correct. Okay, so just to run down here, what do we have to do? We need to first put our equation in standard form. Okay, that's always first. So you have ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Make sure your equation equals 0. Put it in standard form. Once you've put it in standard form, the second step is to factor. Okay, factor your polynomial. You'll have you'll have to go through the process of factoring. So find all your factors, plug them in different ways until you find the one that works. Okay, once you have your factors, then you put each of those factors to equal 0, and you work through and solve for x. Okay, once you solve for x, that's your answers. Okay, then you have to go back and check. So you take those answers and you put them back into the original equation as is on your paper. Okay, and then you rework through with both of those answers being as your x. All right, let's try a few more here just so that we have the proper notes. Okay, we'll clear this. Let's do x squared equals 3x. Okay, so what do we do here if I don't have a third term? Well, I'm still putting it into standard form, meaning my x squared has to go first. So I have x squared here. I'm going to move this over, so I have -3x. And then I'm just going to put this to equal 0. Now, my second step would be to factor, okay? Now, looking at this, I have a common term that I can factor out. What is that common term? What is present in both terms that I can pull or factor out of the equation? Well, I see I've got 2 x's here, and I've got 1 x here, so I can pull out at least 1 x out of each of these. Okay, so if I pull out x, I'm left with x minus 3. Can I factor this any further? Is it possible to factor this any further? No. So these are my 2 factors then. Okay, I don't necessarily have to have that third number in there because this can still factor into two factors here. 1 factor of x, 1 factor of x minus 3. So I'm still putting these to equal 0. Okay, and then x minus 3 equals 0, which means x equals 3. Okay, so my 2 terms, or my 2 answers then are x equals 0 and x minus 3. Okay, so then I again go back and put these in. So I've got x squared equals 3x, and I'm going to plug in first my 0. So 0 squared equals 3 times 0. Well, that gives me 0 and 0, so I know this one works. Okay, and then, excuse me, then I try the 3. So I've got 3 squared equals 3 times 3. Well, I know that that's 9, and 3 times 3 is the same thing as being squared, so that's 9. So this one works as well. All right, so my answers are x equals 0 and x equals 3. Okay, now look back at your book real quick. Right in the middle there between example 9.1c and 9.1d. Okay, remember that dividing by a variable quantity can cause solutions to be lost. In the previous example, dividing by a common factor x would eliminate the solution x equals 0. Just never mind. Okay, we worked it through the way we worked it through without that tidbit of information there, but it is what it is. Okay, let's look at example 1.9d. Okay, 1.9d. Okay, we've got x squared minus 9. So the first thing is standard form. So I've got x squared minus 9. I said minus 9 here. It's x squared equals 9 equals 0. So x squared minus 9 equals 0. Now, this, can I factor this? And if I can factor it, how am I going to factor it? Okay, what are my 2 terms here to get x minus 9? Okay, if you need to, go back to your factoring lessons where it talks about when you only have a binomial here to factor. This is going to basically break down. One's positive, one's negative, and they're going to be the same number. So I've got x plus 3 and x minus 3. Okay, so that's how that factors there. So you factor it just like you normally would factor a binomial. Okay, if you need to review that, go back in your book or your notes and review how to factor those binomials. Okay, so we've got our 2 here. We factored them out. Now we're going to break them down individually to equal 0. Minus 3 equals 0. Okay, so we've got x and negative 3 and x equals a positive 3. Okay, so those are my 2 answers, x and a positive 3 and x and a negative 3. So now I can go back to checking. So x squared equals 9. So so we've got negative 3 squared. Well, when I square, I'm basically multiplying a negative 3 by a negative 3, and that cancels that out. Cancels the negative sign out, makes it positive. So now we have a positive 9 and a positive 9. And then I've got x squared, and I've got a positive 3 squared. So we've got 9 equals 9. So both of these answers work. So those answers are correct. All right, so that is how we work through by factoring. All right, take a look at your practice 9.1 here. We're just going to focus on our practice section up on top here. So for homework, you're going to do Well, let's just do the blue tabs. It shouldn't take you too long to do. So 1719, 258, 17. Actually, just do blue tabs through, let's do blue tabs through, oh, let me see. I just want to make sure we don't have any funky ones in here. Yeah, let's do blue tabs through 17. Okay, so that's 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Okay, 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Let me mark that on my notes here. So 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, and 8 will be your homework. We're going to treat homework just like we have as we've been home. Homework is due by the end of the day. Okay, so once you watch your video, make sure you submit your homework to me either by email or by text. Emily, if it's easier for you to do by email, you can do it by email. That's fine. But I do want to see your work for this. Okay, so make sure that you are submitting your work along with that. Okay, it's important that you get your homework turned in on time. Okay, so make sure that you get it to me by the end of the day so that you do not get a 0 on that homework assignment. All right, if there's any questions at all, feel free, give me a call, shoot me a text. You can reach me on Facebook. You can email me. However you need to get a hold of me, go ahead and do that. Ask your questions. I would rather you ask questions than to hand in an incomplete worksheet. Okay, so make sure that you at least give it an effort. And if you can't figure it out, give me a call and we'll figure it out together. All right, guys. Well, I think that's it. That was our first lesson here, lesson 9.1. And hopefully this will work out for all of us. Just make sure that you're doing your best to keep on top of your work and do what you need to do to get everything turned in on time. I'd hate for you to receive a bad grade just because you can't get your homework done on time. You got all this time at home, so you should be able to get it worked in. And again, as I said, if you have any questions or problems, just give me a call and let me know. All right? Have a good day, guys, and we'll talk to you later. See ya.